안녕하세요. Welcome to All Things Korean. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about 3 grammar forms that all kind of translate to because. I'm going to assume that you've already learned these grammar points but are having trouble distinguishing the difference between the 3. Or if you haven't learned these yet, that's fine. I'm still going to explain each grammar point anyway. This is something that a lot of people seem to get confused about because they all kind of mean the same thing, but not really, and I'm going to teach you why. So with that being said, let's just get started. So we're gonna start with the first grammar point, 아서, 어서, 여서. This is fairly easy to conjugate. It's very similar to the way you conjugate 아요, 어요, 여요, except for the yo, you swap it out with the 서. So if the last syllable of the verb has the vowel a or o, a bright vowel, then you conjugate with 아서. So for example, 많아서, 좋아서, etc. And if the last syllable has any other vowel, then you conjugate it with 어서, such as 멀어서, 만들어서, etc. And if the verb is a 하다 form, then you conjugate it with 여서, but 하여서 gets contracted into 해서. So 지루해서, 궁금해서, and so on. By the way, I should also mention that this applies to both action verbs and descriptive verbs. So verbs and adjectives, they both work. Now, to use this grammar form in a sentence, you have the cause before the 아서, 어서, 여서, and then the latter half of the sentence is the result of that cause. So let's look at an example. 일이 많아서 늦게 잤어요. So 일이 많다, I had a lot of work. 일이 많아서, and the result of that is 늦게 잤어요. I slept late because I had a lot of work to do. This seems pretty straightforward. You just put the cause in the front and the result in the back. However, there are certain restrictions to using this grammar form in a sentence. There are 3 things you need to remember, and I'm going to go over all of them with you. So the first restriction for using 아서, 어서, 여서 in a sentence is that it cannot be used in an imperative sentence. And by that, I mean you cannot use this grammar form to make an order, a command, or a request, or even a suggestion. Anything that has to do with telling someone to do something, that doesn't work with this grammar form. With 아서, 어서, 여서, you simply describe or explain something, the state of something that already is or was, and you're giving the cause for that. Okay, so we're gonna look at another example. 눈이 와서 옷을 많이 입었어요. 눈이 와서 because it snowed. 옷을 많이 입었어요. I wore a lot of clothes. I layered up because it was snowing, right? It was snowing, and as a result of that, I'm all bundled up. What you cannot say is, for example, 눈이 와서 옷을 많이 입으세요. You can't tell someone to dress warmly because it's snowing using this grammar form. How do you say dress warmly because it's snowing? That's going to be the next grammar point. But for this one, for 아서, 어서, 여서, you cannot tell someone to do something or make a request. You know, any sentence endings like 할까요, 해주세요, 하세요, etc. These sentences all don't work. The second restriction for this grammar form is that you cannot conjugate it in the past tense. So, 눈이 와서 cannot be 눈이 왔어서. So the second half of the sentence, the result part, can be in either present or past tense. 옷을 많이 입었어요, 옷을 많이 입어요. Both work. But when you're conjugating the 아서, 어서, 여서, that one doesn't come directly after a past tense marker. Now the third restriction is it cannot come directly after get. This is another pre-final ending or a suffix that is used to refer to future events or like probable assumptions. So when you're making an assumption about something that is or that might be in the future, this one also does not work. So just to wrap that up, 아서, 어서, 여서, this grammar form cannot be used with imperative sentences. It cannot be used after the past tense marker, and it cannot be used after the get pre-final ending. Let's look at a couple more examples before we move on to the next grammar form. 돈이 없어서 여행을 못해요. 돈이 없어서, because I have no money. 여행을 못해요. I can't travel. Okay, I can't travel because I have no money. The next example, K-팝이 좋아서 한국어를 공부해요. So I study Korean because I like K-pop. Alright, let's move on to the second grammar form, which is 으니까. Now at a glance, this grammar form might look very similar to the one we just did, 아서, 어서, 여서, in that the reason comes in the front and then the result or the rest of the sentence comes in the latter part of the sentence. But it is very different. You'll see in a minute. Now, how do you go about conjugating this? If the verb, action or descriptive, if the verb ends in a consonant, in other words, if it has a 받침, then you conjugate with 으니까. For example, 먹다 becomes 먹으니까, 입다 becomes 입으니까, and so on. If the verb does not have a 받침, if it ends in a vowel sound, then you conjugate with 니까. So 가다 is 가니까, 자다 is 자니까. And if the verb ends in a 리을 받침, then the 리을 gets cut off and then you conjugate with 니까. So 멀다 becomes 머니까, 살다 becomes 사니까, and so on. Now, the biggest difference between this 니까 and 아서, 어서, 여서 is that this one can be used for imperative sentences. So our example for today is 비가 오니까 우산을 챙기세요. So 비가 오니까, because it's raining, 우산을 챙기세요. I'm telling you to take an umbrella because it's raining. Another example is 시간이 없으니까 빨리 오세요. 시간이 없다, because I have no time. 빨리 오세요. Come quickly. So come quickly because I don't have any time. Also, another way, this one is different from 아서, 어서, 여서, is that 으니까 or 니까 can be conjugated in the past tense. So let's look at this example. 오늘 월급 받았으니까 제가 밥을 살게요. So I'm offering to treat you to a meal. I'll buy lunch or dinner or whatever because I got my paycheck today. So I got 월급을 받았으니까. So that one, it works in the past tense. Now, what about the other pre-final ending ket? Can you use 받겠으니까? Actually, for future events or probable assumptions or things like that, there's actually a different grammar point. 을 테니까, that sounds a lot more natural in this case. So I'm going to say that ket doesn't really get used in this context or in this grammar point. So those are the main differences between the first grammar point, 아서, 어서, 여서, and then the second grammar point, 으니까. So whether it's an imperative, whether it can be conjugated in the past tense. Now, those are the technical differences, and they should be enough in helping you determine which grammar point to use when you're trying to explain yourself. But there is an underlying, a more fundamental difference between the two grammar points. Otherwise, they would just be the same thing. Why does one work with this and not work with the other when they both just mean because? And the answer there lies in the difference between cause and logical reasoning. And that might seem like the same thing, but it's actually a bit different. So for 아서, 어서, 여서, we're talking about the cause and effect. So something happened and it caused the other thing to happen. They're directly related in that way. So A, it made B happen. That is the premise for 아서, 어서, 여서. Whereas for 으니까, it's not so much the cause. A니까 B is saying A is my logical reasoning for my B statement. It's not the cause. I'm telling you my justification, the logic behind it, not the direct cause. If that is still confusing for you, let's make a couple more sentences using the same reason but different grammar points. So the reason or cause part is going to be 키가 크다, because I'm tall, or because you're tall. The subject can be whatever. But 키가 크다 is going to be our reason, and let's see what sentences we can make using the two different grammar points. So, 키가 커서, because I'm tall. Okay, so what can we say after 키가 커서? What follows is a direct result of the tallness. So 키가 커서 바지가 짧아요. These pants are short because I'm tall. So it's a literal cause and effect. Why are these pants short? Because I'm tall, right? Another example we can make is 키가 커서 머리가 천장에 닿아요. My head touches the ceiling. You're stating something that is, and you're explaining the cause for it. Cause and effect. Now, what sentences can we make with 으니까? 키가 크니까 저것 좀 꺼내주세요. Can you take that out for me? Now, I can just ask you to take that out for me without explaining why, but my logical reasoning, my justification for me making this request is, you're tall. You're the tall one. Can you get that for me? I'm justifying. I'm reasoning with you. Okay? So the tallness is not a direct cause of you taking something out for me, but it's my reasoning. Let's look at another example. 키가 크니까 농구도 잘할 거야. It's a terrible stereotype, assuming that tall people can play basketball, but this is just an example. So 키가 크니까, because he's tall, 농구도 잘할 거야. He's probably really good at basketball because he's tall. So I'm making an assumption that this guy is good at basketball. And what's my reasoning, my logic behind it? It's the fact that he's tall. I'm not explaining the tallness as a direct cause of one's basketball skills. I'm using the tallness as my reasoning, my justification for my statement. For this example, actually, 키가 커서 농구도 잘할 거야. That also actually works, because if I'm assuming that the tallness is a direct cause of his basketball skills, I can also say 키가 커서 농구도 잘할 거야 if I believe that the tallness is the cause. This is an example of a case in which both grammar points kind of work, but there's a very subtle difference in what I'm actually conveying. And this might be why these two grammar points are confusing, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So just remember the difference between cause and logical reasoning. And if that is too much for you, just try to remember the 3 points I mentioned earlier, whether it's an imperative sentence, whether you're conjugating in past tense, and make sure that you're not conjugating with the pre-final ending ket. Alright, this video is getting quite long, so I'm going to just hurry up and head over to the third grammar point, which is 기 때문에. This one is actually quite easy to conjugate. All you need to do is take the verb stem. So take the dictionary form, remove the 다, and just add 기 때문에. So 먹다, 먹기 때문에. 보다, 보기 때문에. 듣다, 듣기 때문에. The good thing about this one is that there are no irregular verbs and exceptions and blah blah blah. Easy peasy. This one is kind of similar to 아서 어서 in that it is talking about the cause and not the logical reasoning. So, likewise, you cannot use this grammar point in an imperative sentence. So I can't say 덥기 때문에 창문을 열어주세요. I can't say that. I can say 더우니까 창문 열어주세요, but I cannot say 덥기 때문에. I can say 덥기 때문에 창문을 열었어요. I can make a statement and explain the cause for that, but I can't use it to make a request. However, unlike 아서, 어서, 여서, this grammar form, 기 때문에, can be conjugated in the past tense. So 더웠기 때문에 also works. It's okay. And lastly, for the pre-final ending ket, no can do. 덥겠기 때문에 is not grammatically correct. Now, if it's also the cause, what is the difference between this 기 때문에 and 아서, 어서, 여서? It's more, this is a bit of a stronger expression when you're really kind of emphasizing the cause of something. And I would say this 기 때문에 sounds a bit more natural in a more formal context when you're trying to explain the cause of something in a formal setting, although 기 때문에 works in both formal and casual situations. So this 때문에 you might have noticed a lot in like song lyrics and dramas and stuff. You might have seen a lot of phrases like 너 때문에, because of you, when I'm trying to kind of emphasize the because of you. You know what I mean? Anyway, yeah, that's just a bit of a subtle difference, a bit more emphasis on the actual cause of things, but otherwise that's how you use 기 때문에, and that, my friends, concludes the 3 grammar points that all kind of translate to because. Is your mind spinning and are you going crazy? I hope not. I think this was a bit of a confusing lesson, but I hope it still clarified some confusions for you. You can try practicing making some sentences below. How about I give you a couple English sentences and you can try to write them in Korean. Write your answers and I'll check if they're correct. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to All Things Korean for more Korean language related videos. And you know the drill, I will see you in the next one. 다음 영상에서 만나요.